Hi everyone, welcome to this incredibly exciting event. I've been so hyped for this for a few months now. My name is Anna Hitchbeckers. I'm a arts journalist and author based here in Edinburgh. And I'm so excited to welcome Madeline Doherty to Lighthouse Books to launch their very first book, Gender Theory. So I'm going to read you a little bio, so everyone knows who you are, and then you're going to do a reading, and then we're going to have a wee chat. And then there'll be about like 15, 20 minutes at the end for questions. I expect questions. So I will personally bully you if there are no questions. So get thinking. So Madeline is a 25-year-old Scottish writer and winner of the 2022 North Literary Agency Prize. She grew up in the Scottish Borders and now lives in Glasgow, where she works in communications and teaches creative writing workshops for the charity Mindwaves. Gender Theory is her first novel, so good, inspired by leaving home and navigating the scrappy beginnings of adulthood. So I'm going to let you give us a little taste of it.
Hello. It's quite stressful to have a mic. I think I'll just read the first one. I was saying earlier I wasn't sure if I want to read this because my parents are here and it is a sex scene. I'll do it. Why not? Okay. This vignette's called Student Hold. You are 18 and this is the first time you have voiced desire, asked for something that you wanted and received it. He is a year older than you, tall, intellectual, more experienced. You have been sitting cross-legged on his bed for an hour, talking about films, him seemingly unaware of you leaning forward, biting your lip, doing all the things you're supposed to. Your responses become shorter and shorter as your conversation becomes his monologue about strong women in film. He's just started telling you about The Bride and Kill Bill when you put your hands on his upper arms and kiss him. Soon, you are sitting on his lap, trying to get lost but worrying about how heavy you are, hoping your foundation will come off on his sheets. His arms are thin and sinewy, and he has wrapped them around you tight. You are trying to ignore the damp smell of his room and the fact that there was nowhere to hang your coat, so it's just lying crumpled on the floor next to a plate that has crumbs on it. The kissing is the beginning, so both of your movements are sloppy and hurried. He pulls his t-shirt over his head and it gets stuck on his earring, and at the same time, you notice that he hasn't got any curtains, so the moonlight streams into the room from behind his body. It silhouettes his frame inside the t-shirt as he struggles, and you start to laugh, but you're cut off when he frees himself and puts his mouth back onto yours. For a few moments, there is no noise except wet sucking mouths and tongues. But then your moans are in conversation, his first, yours in reply. Soon after, too soon really, he is thrusting into you in the way a broken gutter smacks against a building. You are on your back looking at his face, and his gaze is angled downwards at your chest. You lower yours and look at his collarbones and ribs, visible underneath his pale skin. You think about butterflies wearing their skeleton on the outside of their papery wings. You breathe deeply because it started to hurt, but not enough to say anything and engage in the necessary reassembling of parts. The metal bed frame creaks. And a minute later, his eyes close as he cries out and sort of sinks onto you, his hard body biting your soft one. Did you? He asks, and you reply, yeah. You clean up and dress, and he stays in bed, covers pulled up to his belly button, clicking on off videos on his phone. Small bursts of noise keep making you drunk as they fill the room, and you are trying not to look at him while you put on your socks. Dressing feels more vulnerable than being naked somehow, and you can see him sneaking glances at you from the mirror on his chest of drawers. You walk over to the bed and lean in to kiss him with an ending this time, and he says, will you still come out on Thursday? And you say, of course, even though this is the first time he's asked you. Then you walk out of his room, across the hallway, out the door and down the stairs, spilling into the moonlight and taking your phone out of your coat pocket. You have a series of texts from Ella, asking where you are, when you're coming home, and then, wait, are you with Seminar Boy? You start walking back to Halls, which is home now, and every few steps you close your eyes and take a deep breath in, feeling the cold air on your face. You realize that you're lost as the streets begin to blur into each other. You want to stop and check your phone and get your bearings, but the night is so quiet you force yourself to keep going so you can reassure yourself with the sound of your boots hitting pavement.
So we're going to start at the very beginning of the book, even before that, with the title, Gender Theory. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the title and how for you it fits in with like the narrative that you're telling.
Okay, it was kind of a process. I think for me it was always called Gender Theory, and that was what I workshopped it as in uni, and that's what I sent to my now agent, Stay. And then the publishers, John Murray, originally wanted to change it because they felt like it was right in the title. So we did change it, and then I changed my mind and I really wanted to change it back. And then I had to send an email with bullet points about why I thought that it was a good title.
Oh my god, really?
Yeah, so it's actually quite a good. I had my agent's wife on my side because she was like, "I've heard this one," so I kind of put a quote from her. But I thought this. I think that it's quite a funny title because it is a kind of a play on Gender Trouble by Judith Butler,
Mm-hmm.
but it is quite hard to explain to someone why you think something is funny. So
I can do it now.
I got a lot of like, oh, it sounds like a text, but I think she's in uni at the beginning of the novel. She's having a lot of experiences that are lining up quite closely, I think, with a lot of things to do with gender theory, you know, just experiencing compulsory heterosexuality, that kind of stuff. I really wanted it to be a book about gender that never really addressed gender or said the word feminism. So I thought having quite a cold analytical title would feel like a bit of a play against how it's quite an intimate and messy book, I think. But I think that most of the interactions in the book that happen are kind of underpinned by gender. Like she has a very gendered illness. The men that she's with, here is a woman, the woman that she's with, she is kind of compared to them. That way I feel like gender's kind of all of it.
Yeah. You said that you didn't want kind of gender to be like mentioned in this explicit way. Why was that?
I think when I was in university, me and my friends talked about feminism quite a lot, but we found it quite hard to put into context with the things that were actually happening to us in our real life. And I think that if you're seeing someone or you're having an argument with a friend or whatever, you're not really talking about feminism. It's a relationship dynamic that feels very specific to you. So I wanted to maybe have a kind of mediation on the idea that we're all playing into these dynamics all the time, but they feel so singular, but they are very universal. So I don't think that you have to explicitly like quote a theorist or say that you're talking about feminism.
Yeah, that does make sense. It also made me think about how theory itself can often be like a really gendered thing. Like I know that at university, the people that I found would often like really emphasize theory were people who weren't living like the lived experience of these things. Like that divide between theory and practice is often kind of very gendered, where it's mostly like race or queerness, or all of these things. Was that also kind of part of?
Yeah, definitely. I did think that it was funny. I mean, during my degree, spending all of these times in kind of like dusty seminar rooms in the library, reading things and finding it so confusing that someone who died 100 years ago could be having an experience the same as the experience that I was going through, but they were using different language. So I wanted it to be a modern novel that was concerned with the same kind of things that, like, you know, like Emma by Jane Austen is confirmed, but like that is kind of a having a boyfriend book. And it's just like at the end of the day, it's all kind of going to each other's houses and talking about each other's relationship dynamics, like kissing each other, and that is timeless.
It really is. Yeah, it is shocking to me how much Jane Austen has never really aged. Like it's still the
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so this is such a kind of visceral book in some ways. Like it feels so like lived in. You have this relationship between the two characters. We never know the name of the protagonist. It's her and her best friend Ella. And that feels so lived in. There's a way you write with like a real attention to detail. It's like you say, it feels very singular, it feels very individual. But you also have this overarching examination throughout the book of illness that the narrator, the protagonist, is going through. And I'm curious, what came first in this book? Was it the characters that kind of spoke to you? You want to explore that, or was it some of the themes that you were looking at?
I think I wrote it kind of chronologically. So I wrote the first vignette for a university seminar where I was being workshopped and I had to write something. And it's that kind of, you know, you sit down to write something and you don't know what you're going to write about. And then something kind of came to me, and as I was writing, I was like, oh, I guess I can do that. Quite fully formed. And I just kept going. Like I did a master's because I wanted to write a novel or write something longer, and I was really struggling with that. And then I realized that I could kind of trick myself into writing a novel by writing these vignettes. And then it was originally going to be just like a kind of dissertation length
Sure,
So
yeah,
I was like, oh, I've got 12,500 words or whatever. So I was like, I'll do 4 short vignettes, and it's going to be different sexual experiences of this one girl's life. And it was very like, when you're writing for academic purposes, I was really trying to emphasize that up. So I was like, I was in season. Once a people full time.
Yeah.
And then I
The
was
Ali
writing
Smith
it.
effect.
Yeah, literally, and then YouTube that. But then I was writing it and I was like, oh, maybe it would be cool if I did sexual experiences, but only one of them was like a physical sexual experience, and one of them was an infatuation, and one of them was a sexual harassment kind of story, and then one of them was more of like a long-term yearning situation. And then I was writing it, and then my tutor said to me, I think this is a novel, I don't think that this is a short piece. And then I kept writing it, and then the endometriosis stuff kind of came in by mistake. But I had endometriosis, so it wasn't, it's never really by mistake. But I was thinking, what's something that would shape your experience of sexuality? What's a good reason for her to be kind of like basically quite damaged and not very in touch with her body? And I was like, well, I have this thing.
Yeah. It is crazy to me that we don't think about kind of like gynecological matters as a kind of element of desire, really. I was thinking this a lot like last year, that you feel desire in the body, like it's a physical thing, and we don't talk about these things. Like even conversations around contraception are so medicalized that they're not about sex, really. They're not about desire and how like you feel inside. So it's really interesting to hear you kind of talk about like wanting to put those things in conversation with each other.
Well, I think when you're chronically ill or when you're disabled, it's part of your life that you don't have much control over, and you don't have to decide. Like, you don't get to decide when it comes up or who it affects or you tell about it, that kind of thing. So I think I've read quite a lot of books that either really romanticized chronic illness to the point that the people who were unwell were saintly and it was all about them overcoming this illness or whatever. And then I read a lot of horrible narratives about people who die, who don't get better and that kind of thing. And I was like, what about all of the living that goes in between those kinds of things? And a big part of that is managing your condition day to day. Also, if it is a reproductive illness, obviously it factors into the way that you think about love and sex and relationships, managing pain one side, but also children. Like,
it's about the future.
Especially if you're a woman or if you're soon to be a woman.
So I'm interested in this idea of making illness visible through narrative. Like the character in this book struggles a lot with kind of the medical profession, but also with her relationships with people like not really understanding where she's coming from. Was this idea of visibility like quite important to you when you were like thinking through how to write about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, definitely my own experience with illness is going to bleed in, even if it's not exactly the same as the things that happened to me. But I think what I found hard when I was a young teenager diagnosed, I was like, there's no kind of representation that I can see for, young women who are disabled, first of all. And then all of the stuff I was finding was talking about invisible illnesses. And I was like, I don't really know if I like the idea of that, because I think that when I'm in pain, it is visible and it's more to look for. I was like, I'm struggling to find things that's about people who are unwell like their whole life, and it's also not made to be a smaller part of their life. I don't think I was specifically writing with representation in mind, but it was a big part of writing. I wanted it to feel real, and I wanted it to kind of crop up in the narrative the way that it crops up in my life, which is at unfortunate times you can't plan it. And I didn't want it to be a plot point that was solved or went away. I just wanted it to kind of be there.
Yeah. Have you kind of had responses from other people who have endometriosis? Have they read it? Were you kind of thinking about that audience in mind?
Kind of. I think I was trying not to think about it because you don't want to claim to be the leading representation of anything. I think I wanted it to feel relatable for people who have chronic illnesses where the main symptom is pain, just like kind of unending pain that cannot be solved, which is loads. And then I also kind of wanted it to be relatable more broadly. I think the endometriosis can be read a little bit as a metaphor as well for like mental illness or for feeling like there's something wrong with you generally. So I haven't had many responses yet. I've had a couple of like people in my life that I didn't know that well who have read the book and got in touch with them like, oh, I've actually been struggling with something similar, which is nice because I was kind of like, why haven't we been talking about it? But it is the nice. And also like loads of people have periods and loads of people have painful periods and that kind of thing. So I have had lots of conversations with people in my life who were like, oh, it's kind of like this for me when I have my period. And I've been like, well, that might not be normal. I think people who have periods are kind of taught that it's normal to be in intense pain a lot. Yeah, but it's not. Like loads of people don't have painful periods. This might be a crazy thing to say if you do kids.
That's like the main thing to take away from medical advice. It makes me think of how a lot of chronic illness is often the body kind of disrupting itself, right? Like it's the thing with autoimmune illness that like your body attacks itself, even endometriosis. And I'm wondering if that was also part of what you were trying to look at, this idea of it's not like a foreign thing that is hurting you, but that kind of complication of your body is like hurting itself almost.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was quite pleased with myself while I was trying things. I was like, oh, it's quite good symbolically. Or like a woman being very stupid in her relationships. And it's like she is kind of the main problem in her own life throughout the whole novel. And I think that's definitely relatable to me. This kind of like getting in your own way all the time and not being able to zoom out and see your piece from a different perspective. So I wanted it to feel like a very interior narrative and her going round and round in circles all the time and not understanding what's wrong and not understanding what she's doing. Which is why I think I needed to have Ella to like pull her out a bit, or it would have just been a boring book that's in their head the whole time.
Also fine.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe like too much of my diary then.
Sure. Okay. So tell me about Ella. So Ella is like the kind of main character that's named in the novel. Tell me about how she kind of emerged, how she came in.
I think I was thinking about when you go to university, and my experience certainly was just like wanting to find a friend. Like my mum used to always say to me this whole like, oh, you'll move away and you'll find your people and those people will understand you. And that being a friendship-based thing, not a romance-based thing, wanting to have someone like a sister, I guess, in a way. So Ella is more this kind of idealized version of what that could mean. So like, I mean, she's lovely, kind of throughout the whole book. She's pretty perfect until the end. And then I wanted, as the book continued, to kind of zoom out and be like, oh, is Ella perfect? Or is the narrator only seeing one side of her and is viewing her as like a martyr and a sister and, you know, girlfriend kind of back and forth, but like what's Ella doing with?
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be like we actually don't see Ella that clearly. I think she's more of a idealized figure.
Yeah. What was it? So I really loved the friendship dynamic in this book. I wrote a book about friendship. I love friendship. I think it's so nice. And I'm curious what it was about that dynamic. You mentioned that kind of your mum said that it would be like this kind of like structured feature in your life. I'm curious what it was about that dynamic, and I suppose especially like female friendship that drew you in, that you wanted to explore.
I think when I was thinking about the novel as being these kinds of 4 long vignettes, the longest one I always wanted to be like falling in love with a friend or having a strange blurred dynamic that was never really consummated or made visible. It was more of a kind of worry. And I think as a young bisexual woman, it is the weirdest dynamic. I think being friends with a straight girl when you're not really out yourself and you're going back and forth between that. I mean, it's already weird when you're bisexual and you think like, I don't know if I like this girl or if I fancy this girl or if I want to be this girl or if I wish this girl was my sister. So I really wanted it to feel kind of confusing for her, and then also for her to be aware that it's the most important relationship in her life, and that making that relationship physical or voicing love that might be unrequited would be like pretty dangerous for her. But I also kind of wanted to hint a little bit at the way that that's really difficult for Ella as well, to be like the perfect person in somebody's life. So it's been strange kind of trying to market a book that's kind of anti-label and about fluidity, because I feel like when someone says it's a book about female friendship, it doesn't feel quite right to me. But then when people say it's a book about your relationships, that doesn't feel quite right to me either. I wanted it to feel.
Yes. Yeah. It's the thing that I kind of was thinking about a lot when I was writing my book, which is how do we kind of define the boundary between platonic friendship and non-platonic friendship, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe that's a boundary that doesn't really need to exist, maybe in some way. Like, what do you think about that? I'm so curious because I don't know what I think about that yet.
Yeah, me neither. I guess. I mean, like, I think it kind of depends if you're someone who's interested in monogamy.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's also
first of all, and also I guess it's something to think about if the person that you are seeking this kind of platonic, romantic marriage dynamic, are they straight?
Sure.
I think, yeah, I don't know how that works. It's weird, isn't it? It's like being somebody who has very intense feelings about people and being like, it doesn't feel like enough to call this person my friend or my best friend, but I also don't want to, get married to this person or necessarily have sex with this person, or I'm not sure. So what are they to me, and how does society like validate us? I don't know. I think like in a way, I think that for the narrator, Ella is kind of somebody that she wishes that she could be, or not specifically, but maybe more, she wishes that she was more sure about her own life and stuff. There's also definitely an element of sexual attraction there, and there's that kind of sort of envious of her too. So I wanted it to be about kind of how that intense female friendship dynamic can be quite negative and toxic as well. But it's kind of the best and worst thing, isn't it? Like the intensity of women.
Yeah. No, it really is. But it does also make me wonder if it is about like limitations of language, maybe. Like, is there, because you were just saying, like, what do you call that person? If there were a word for it, would we feel less crazy?
Yeah,
like more settled, maybe. I don't know.
And then also, like, if that's how you feel, what happens if that person gets married to someone that isn't you, or has a romantic partner that isn't you, or if you break up, or what are the words for that? Because I think I was very aware of this again when I was in university, just when kind of life plays out just unbelievably intensely. So it's kind of just like a microcosm of like a reality TV show kind of things happening. And it was me and all of my friends having these relationships kind of in sped up mode. So people I was living with would like meet someone, start going out with them, and then start spending every night with them in like the space of 3 weeks, and then by Christmas they would be broken up and that kind of thing. And then that was kind of happening with friendships as well. It was like speed dating friendships. And I was thinking about this, like, I mean, for the majority of the book, Elle and the narrator's relationship is not great, but they're kind of chasing this high at the beginning of the friendship. And I wanted to explore that kind of relationship that's so intense. How do you stop from burning out? How do you turn it into a manageable thing? Elle gets a partner. The narrator also gets a partner at one point, kind of with the aim of moving through life with Ella. At some point, like, oh, maybe if I have a boyfriend who's her boyfriend's friend, maybe that's how we be in each other's lives and stuff. Yeah, I think you're right. It's the kind of not having a word and also not being very good at communicating. So you don't know what the other one wants.
And how to express it and how to ask for what you want.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It makes me kind of like, one of the things I thought was really interesting in the book is this kind of ongoing thing about the protagonist being so scared of losing Ella. And I was wondering what you think about how we navigate the line or like the boundaries between loss and change. Because a lot of her imagination of how she loses this person is almost her inflexibility to accept change. Like, it's not just losing the person, it's losing the imagination of the life that exists right at that second. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely think that's what I was trying to do. I wanted it to be like Ella kind of leaving university and moving on with her life, and not doing everything perfectly, but having her kind of goal, which is like figuring out what she wants. She wants to settle down and have a partner and that kind of thing. And the narrator constantly having her goal to be to catch up to Ella instead of finding out what she wants herself. And I think a lot of that is maybe she's denying her own illness and that kind of being in her future. And she's thinking like, oh, I can stay here. If you could be my whole life, it means I don't have to choose. Which is just like growing up.
Yeah, which is like such a painful, it's such a painful moment.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a really interesting trend in literature at the moment where that kind of moment in your 20s, that sort of coming of age in your 20s is being really paid attention to in a way that's not just about like being a child and being a teenager. And I think for a while we were like, oh, that's the really painful part. And now we're like, no, it's being 23 and being a fucking idiot is like the really painful part. Was there ever kind of a temptation to extend the timeline of the book or to go back or?
Not really. I think I was writing, she was always a couple of years older than I was, but quite immature. So I was like, I don't want to assume that at this stage of my life, and then started writing the book when I was 21. So I was like, I don't want her to have children or just basically to do anything that I have no clue about.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of the book, when stuff would happen that I didn't feel like I had much personal knowledge of, I would like mine anecdotes from my friends' lives, or I would ask people questions, or I would, like I was a nanny for a while, so I was like, if she's a nanny as well, because I know what that's like, all of that kind of stuff. But I think I was interested in exploring that stage of coming of age, becoming an adult, because when you're a child, I feel like you're always thinking, oh, life is going to be so good when I'm 13 because I'll be able to do this. And then I'll be 17, I'll be able to drive. And I'll be 18, I'll be able to drink. And then you assume that everyone you meet that are in their 20s is grown up. And then everyone that you meet that is older than that is like dead. Basically. It's irrelevant to you.
It's true.
You do that kind of like, I remember being 11 or 12 and being like, so I guess when I'm 30, like life will just be over. And then you actually do move into your 20s and you're like, I feel exactly the same as I did when I was 18, except I have a little bit more power to make mistakes. I have a little bit more money that I can spend, and that's kind of it. And the kind of endless landscape of your 20s, everybody is doing different things. You're not all in the same place kind of for the first time, because uni is basically this high school.
Yeah, it's like boarding school.
Yeah.
Really.
So it's this weird like arrested development, and then it's in your 20s when you start having to really be like, oh, my friend just got a promotion in their job and I'm really jealous. Does that mean that I want to do that? And you have to start figuring out what you want to do, and you have less of a guide map, I think. So I wanted to document that time where it feels like everyone that's been so close to you is moving away.
Yeah.
And
yeah. It's really interesting what you were saying about being a teenager and kind of constantly waiting to get older. I remember as a kid, every year older I would get, like within a week, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm 14 now. I can't believe I was ever 13. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I was such a child.
Yeah.
And that would like keep going until I hit my 20s. And then I stopped feeling like matched with my age, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
Do you think that's also a big part of it, that kind of sense of discomfort of being like, oh, I'm moving towards being an adult, or I'm maybe moving towards no longer feeling young and free. We only really have an imagination of ourselves as young. It's hard to kind of imagine beyond that.
Yeah, it's weird. I think my big sister is 7 years older than me, and I have half siblings than that again. So I was always really racing to catch up and doing that kind of. My sister would have friends around, my kind of meet up, and I'd be like, "Oh, they're so cool! They're having a cool conversation." Different. And then I realized that the longing was just like not to be 18, but to be different, or be something else. You just like, everything's cool when you can't do it, and then you start being able to do it. It's less fun. Like it's never as fun having an alcoholic drink as when you're not allowed one. And then you have to really start, or, like when you're younger, I used to nanny this wee boy, and he'd always be, and my sister would always be like, let's play meetings, let's play jobs. And then they just kind of go and sit down at the table, and then they kind of be like, this is it. Like, we have a meeting, or like I had a phone meeting once and I was there, and they're like, that's what Mommy does when she has her meetings. I'm like, yeah, it's not fun. Like, it's just this, you want to do something that you've never done before.
Yeah.
And adulthood is kind of constantly doing things that you've never done before, and then also doing the same thing every day. Never present. It's like a horrible mix of like change and constant. Like,
like fear and mentality.
And then you realize you're like, oh, being a kid is
and it's like that again. So I kind of want to think about some of the ways, like when I was reading this book, the kind of main thing that struck me in terms of what you were exploring was this idea of agency, and you kind of like touched on that a little bit before. that idea of like illness being that you don't have control over yourself, over your body. And the way that agency kind of plays out in this novel is really, really interesting. It intersects with illness, but also with like queer desire, with self-sufficiency, with care, with like capitalism and work. And it's about like how do you have agency of your life. I'm curious what it was you wanted to explore in terms of agency and whether the kind of constructing the narrative was a way of giving the protagonist some form of agency, maybe.
I think it's funny. The narrator's kind of personality is very different from my own personality. I think that in a lot of ways she is quite passive, or she wants to be told what to do, and that's like not really been my experience personally. So quite a lot of the narrative was be kind of like making up a situation and being like, oh, how would I act? And I was kind of just the opposite.
Yeah.
But I wanted to figure out, I wanted to construct like a believable narrative of why somebody would do that. And I think maybe a little bit of that was me looking back on interactions I've had, fights I've had with people, and being like, I don't understand why people act like that. And then I was like, right, well, let's take a step back and figure out why somebody would act like that. Maybe it's like a little bit the way they were raised, maybe it's a little bit the friends they've had, maybe it's this. So I wanted to make a person.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But a person that felt believable. And I wanted to show basically that when you don't have a very high opinion of yourselves, there is a lot of ways that you can hurt yourself. And it's not just the obvious. So I think that kind of the main way that she hurts herself throughout the book is like she keeps herself stuck. She's in her own way. And that doesn't mean that anything is her fault or that she deserves to be unwell or anything. But I did want to kind of explore her spiraling, basically. And I wanted it to be a kind of back and forth, having sympathy for her, but then also maybe being like, oh, I had an ex-friend that acted like this and I had no sympathy for them.
Yeah.
I wanted her to be like not good or bad, basically.
Yeah. I think it's really really interesting, that idea of passivity as a choice in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you just like talk a little bit more about that? Because we think of it as that being a lack of choice, a lack of decision, a lack of like, well, letting someone else take the charge. But in this book, it really is that she has chosen to do that. Like it's an abdication of responsibility, but that in itself is an act.
I think well, obviously, you know, like she doesn't choose to be well in the way that she's unwell, but I did kind of want her illness to reflect. Well, she sees her illness as a kind of sign that there's something wrong with her. Kind of like, oh, well, of course I never had any chance because I've been kind of like rotten. There's always been something wrong with me, and this is a physical manifestation of that. So I wanted, I mean, you can do that in fiction, and you can make someone's physical circumstances kind of reflect their emotional journey. I wanted it to be kind of, you know, a chicken or an egg, like, why is she like that? What happened? But then also, I think deciding not to choose is still deciding. I think deciding that you want to seek people out who are going to kind of steer you through life is the decision. It's not making a decision. It's deciding to do that. So I think that's why I wanted, towards the end, spoilers, she kind of ends where she started, but she has a different mindset, which is
yeah, that's the whole point of that.
Yeah,
that's what they say. It's very hard, but that's the whole point. I think it's really interesting hearing you talk about the protagonist. Because I think I have a lot of sympathy for the protagonist. Maybe I'm also just like quite annoying. I was like, no, I get it. She made a lot of sense to me. But it's very interesting hearing you speak about her in like such a clear-eyed way. I'm curious, what was your relationship with her? Was she someone that you found at times like difficult to write, difficult to get in the mindset of?
I think,
were you ever tempted to like make her nicer or more like you in some ways?
Well, I was kind of, I'm assuming
I'm gonna assume it.
I think I've had a couple of responses where people have been like, oh, she's such a bitch. And I'm like, oh, I think if I was in your head, you would probably think some problematic things also. I think we don't get to see her that clearly because we see the way that she thinks about everything. So I'm sure, like when you're in someone's head, sometimes you're reading it and you're thinking like, oh, well, why would they want to go out with her? Or why are they so angry with her or whatever? But it's the classic unreliable narrator, isn't it? When you're in someone's head, everyone can justify what they were doing. I think I just wanted to make her like a normal person that makes a lot of mistakes. because she's like,
Yeah.
And then that she keeps making those mistakes and people have less grace for her because then she's continuing forward instead of like continue on the same path.
Yeah, it's still becoming a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about like kind of being in her head, which brings me to like one of the most interesting and distinctive parts of this novel that I really like, which is the voice that you write this in. I don't know if any of you have like, peeked to the novel yet, but it is almost entirely, apart from maybe one email, written in the second person voice.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could tell me a little bit about that choice, whether that was always the case, whether you ever considered kind of switching, like how, because I don't think I've ever read a novel like that. It was crazy.
I think I read In the Greenhouse by Carmen Ray Machado, which is a memoir, but a very it's kind of like part theory, part memoir. It's like incredibly personal, but then it also comes from set. And I read it, and I hadn't really read anything like that before, and this is incredible. And then I was just kind of thinking while I was reading, I was like, I wonder if she did this. How did she make this not boring? And from a technical standpoint, I was trying to pull it apart. And then I read Tennis Lessons by Susanna Dickey, which I love.
Great.
Yeah. And that's in second person as well, but it's over a way long. It starts when she's a child, and then but it's also like a kind of snapshot. But and then I started writing this vignette. I think so much of not second guessing myself and feeling worried was just like treating it like a short story the whole time, kind of being like, oh, I can go back and change it, or it's not really a book. It's I'm finding it a lot harder with the second one because I like know I'm writing a book now and people care. But the first time I was just kind of trying stuff out and having fun. And I really liked that it was like very intimate and compulsive to read, but that there was also a kind of anonymous anonymity about it, where I was like, I want her to feel like a singular person, but I also want her to kind of feel like empathy for the reader when they're reading it. And when I was writing, I tried a couple of vignettes in first person, and I just found it too annoying. Not generally, but like for this narrative specifically, I was like, if you were reading her, I think this, it would feel a little bit more frustrating. Whereas I wanted it to feel like, I think when you are living, you don't see all of your decisions as like a series of laid out decisions. And I think that sometimes when you read a first person book and they say like, I did this and I did this, it feels more calculated. I just wanted it to feel like kind of sweeping, like her line, basically, the way that she actually.
Did it change how you thought about the reading and how they would encounter the book? Because again, that's such a quite like unique way of writing, because it is implicating the reader directly. And it's like addressed to the protagonist, but it's also kind of addressed to your audience. Did that kind of change how you're thinking about who would read it, how you felt when you were writing it? Did it feel like more immediate, like it would have like eyes upon it?
I think I wish I could go back to when I was writing it for me. I was the reader. I wanted to write a book that I would enjoy. I wanted to write a book that would like impress my course mates and that my tutor would like. So I think maybe I started it just like not really thinking about it at all. And then it's that kind of thing where as it kept going, sometimes I would read back and I thought, oh, that's quite a clever thing I've just done there.
That's the nicest feeling.
And then my tutor would say like, oh, it's really cool that you're doing this. And I'm like, no, it's but it was more, which I guess maybe is the second person, like composing to me, composing to write. I was just kind of going.
Yeah. Do you think like your future writing will involve the same like experimentation with form? Is that like something that you're interested in keep exploring in different ways? Or do you want something a little bit more traditional?
I'm thinking about this book. I'm trying to another novel.
I'm sorry to like traumatize you in the middle of your book launch.
I think I don't know. I think I'm not reading gender theory back probably ever, because I know that I would read it and be like, oh, I would do this now and I would change it. I think for that novel, I'm very proud of the second person. I think it was the right way to tell the story. I'm getting a little bit caught up. I was worried for a while that I could only write decent prose that was in the second person. But then I was like, oh, I think I've just got used to writing it this way. And I can't think of myself as someone who writes books like this, because I've written one. Like I'm still kind of figuring out my style. So I want to do something different. I want to do something maybe a little bit less experimental technique wise, because I wrote this book in masters. I loved doing it. I think maybe it would be fun. I'm not an academia anymore. I want to try something else. I want to try something that will kind of keep me excited. And I think maybe doing another novel in the second person would feel too much like a continuation.
Yeah, yeah,
but I don't know. That's me done.
Okay, I will. Gonna follow up. I have one more question, and then I'm gonna hand it over to you guys. So what I really loved about, because I've lived in Scotland for like almost 9 years now, and one of the really lovely things about reading this was the way that each chapter is structured around a place in either in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in kind of parts of England as well.
Yeah.
But it was always like very rooted to place.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that choice and how that came about.
I think originally the vignettes were unnamed, and then about halfway through, I was like, oh, I need to give these names. They weren't chapters, so I didn't want to be chapters. I was thinking about doing the age, but I just read Tennis Lessons, and that's what Susanna Dickey does. So I was getting a little bit too like, I can't write that book in second person, it's also like that.
Sure, yeah.
So I was thinking, and then I was looking back at the first vignette I wrote, which was just titled Walls. And then I was like, oh, well, they are all kind of around the place, and I moved things around. And then I was thinking, I started writing this while the effects of the pandemic were still really being felt. Like I wrote some of these in lockdown. I did quite a lot of like online uni things. So I was doing a lot of reminiscing about university. And then I was like, oh, I'm gonna pull most of them over like places I really like. Or for instance, one of the flats is like my friend's old flat. The parks are all parks I've been to. It is probably kind of the closest to my real life, that stuff. And it's nice because then lots of my friends who I went to uni with away now, we all live in places. So it's nice to feel like a kind of time capsule. Yeah. And all of the flats, I can break out making up blueprints or anything. So the layout is just like flats I have been in my life.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah.
So like, well, my partner was reading one of them. He was like, "This is our house." And I was like, you know why that feels so difficult?
Oh no, I have really bad spatial imagination. I would also need you.
Yeah. Also, I'm not that nice about it, so I would be like, and I guess they have a bathroom here. It's like my friend.
Alrighty, so I am wondering if you have questions, and I can just hand you the mic, maybe, or you can yell it at me and I'll repeat it back to the audience. But yeah, does anyone have anything they want to ask? Yeah, hi.
I love the book.
Thank you.
My question is, you mentioned like the fact that obviously you're writing novel 2 now, you probably won't go back and do gender theory with your, like, as you get better at writing and get older and stuff like that, and that you notice anything that you want to change. You also touched on like your relationship while you're writing it with the reader and trying hard to not sort of be a martyr on writing about very serious issues that you don't have one experience of and things like that. Yeah. I would love to know, if you read this book when you were 16, what do you think you would have got out of it specifically? What do you think you would have thought about the protagonist and about the novel?
I think I would have been like, oh my gosh, I think I have endometriosis. So that would have been huge, first of all. I think I got a really lovely review the other day that when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the main goal. This is what you want. She was like, I've never read anything like this before, and I loved it, and I want to read books like this. And then I messaged her back, and I was like, what an incredible place to be. If you like this, read this. So I was like, I really like the idea of my work being a gateway into something, because I also had a time where I read a book and I was like, I've never read anything like this before, and then I looked up that writer's other books, and then I looked at their favorite writers, and then I found kind of all of the stuff I like. So I really like the idea of someone reading this and being like, oh, I like weird introspective novels, and then thinking that, and then they get to read Sally Rooney. Like, what a thrill. So,
you were the gateway to Sally Rooney.
Yeah.
And one person's like,
can you imagine anything better?
Thank you.
Do we have other questions? Hello, yeah, at the back. Do you want to yell and then I'll repeat?
I'm just really interested, given how deep the characterization really is of the main characters. Why didn't you name your main character?
I think kind of because I wanted her to feel like no one and everyone. I wanted her, quite a shallow mess from like she doesn't know who she is, nobody really kind of. And I also think maybe a little bit I was feeling quite intimidated by my Truthsome Masters, and I wanted to do something that felt like a bit easier. But I do think it works as well. So yeah, that's why.
Really like to kind of talk about your process, the writing and the and I just wonder your kind of writing, um, where you might write, person day or night. Oh, yeah, and sense of that. Think about your next.
It's been a bit of a weird transition because when I wrote this book, I was doing a master's and I had a job. And now with this one, this is my job. So, which actually is awful. I think it's such a first world problem. But you can't really treat writing like a 9 to 5 because it's too creative. I don't sit and type all day. I actually sit at my laptop typing like relatively little. I don't really like editing or drafting loads. So I like to spend when I sit down at my laptop, I want to know what I'm going to say, basically. So I spend a lot of time like kicking about, thinking, going out, eavesdropping on conversations, that kind of thing. But the first one, generally, I had deadlines, which was unbelievably motivational. So I would like more deadlines kind of in my life. When I'm the one setting the deadlines, I don't. So I'm still trying to figure out my writing process, but I don't really write in the night because I don't like speed stuff. Yeah, figuring it out.
So you mentioned some of your like literary influences, choices. Curious what like you think about books that are on your heart.
Ooh, it's been quite hard to read stuff that is coming out at the same time as my book.
Yeah.
Because I think I've got a bit too like jealous and narrow-sighted about it. So every time I read a good book that's come out recently, I'm like, this is so good. I would have loved to write this. So I've kind of been looking back. When I find a writer I really like, I always try and look up who their influences were and who they were interested in. But then more recently, I just read Death of a Bookseller the last few days ago. I think that's quite recently out. That was great. I loved it. I kind of read all across genres. Anything that's like vaguely literary, I'm into. But yeah, I'm not reading a lot at the moment, and everything I am reading is old. I think it's sometimes you can get a little bit too in there. Oh, okay. Well, I've been reading a lot of Jonathan Franzen. I love Sadie Smith. I love Jean Rhys. I'm reading a lot of her. I really recommend her. I love Jane Austen. Yeah, I'll get like. I'll show you my notes up.
I want to very briefly piggyback off that question, and just ask what it is about Sally Rooney that you like. I love Sally Rooney.
I'm a huge fan of hers. Her first novel has a character that has endometriosis, and that's kind of how I realized I had endometriosis, which was quite bizarre as well. Because then I was thinking when I was like working on publishing this, I was like, well, I wonder if someone's going to read this and realize that they're chronically unwell, and that feels like a weird kind of thing to do. So I think I put a note in the back of the book about endometriosis, which I didn't really want to do from a literary perspective, but then I was like, oh, books do have real meaning in the real world. But yeah, Sally Rooney I love. I think does perfectly what I want to do, which is like communicate kind of age-old relationship dynamics in a really modern way. Like you read something by J.D. Salinger, and I think Sally Rooney is communicating the same thing, but it's like via text. I think that's pretty clever. I think she's a timeless writer, and I really want to continue.
I really want to continue one. They wouldn't send me one. They said they'd
Send
have
me
one.
one either.
It's not fair.
I feel like
should print.
the only reason that you want to get one is they send you through.
Yeah, they're really.
I'm like, oh, no,
Yeah. So it's crazy. It's wild. You kind of said that you are interested in like relationship genre, and she does that. But you also said that you read across genres. I'm curious whether you can ever see yourself writing across genres as well.
Oh, I think I'd love to. I don't know if it's because I'm at the very beginning of my career, if it's because I'm lazy, but a lot of the heavy genre stuff needs to do a lot of research. So I don't know if I love literary sci-fi, I love literary fantasy, I love normal sci-fi too. I don't know if I'm at the point where I have the stamina to be constructing worlds yet.
Yeah. Yes,
So I think,
that's fun.
yeah,
It's
I appreciate
hard.
like people talking to each other on the phone.
Yeah. I honestly, I don't write fiction, and I find even writing fiction like world building enough. I'm like, how do you make up a character?
Yeah,
How did they just do a random thing
I'm
they
like,
didn't
what
do?
does her flat look like?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Imagine trying to jump from that to aliens feels
Yeah.
too much.
Too much. We have time for a couple more questions if anyone in the room has one. Hi, at the back.
Hi, I'm just wondering how much is back and how much is fixed.
Oh, that's such a specific question. I don't really have a number. I think she has had a couple of similar experiences to me. She's had a couple of similar experiences to like friends I have and people I know. And then I guess there's the kind of general blur of like she is a woman at the same time as I am a woman, but I never really wanted to write a memoir. I always wanted to write a novel. That was where the kind of challenge and excitement was for me. I think I find my own life quite boring. I feel like everybody maybe feels like that. I didn't really want to write a diary. Also, I think there's a little bit of distance where if I wrote a memoir and then we were having these conversations about like, oh, what was the narrator thinking with this? I think I would feel a bit attacked. So it's good to make someone up and then pin all of your damage on them.
Do we have another question? Hi.
So in terms of novelty, it's quite good. Have you used it before?
Thank you, Mum. Right, like yeah, I did not find writing it a very therapeutic experience, to be honest. I mean, having had the actual therapy is definitely a different one. I think I do believe in the kind of shade saying of like, don't write from the wound, write from the scar. So I don't think it's very good to write about something that you're still working through and then publish it while you're working through it. So I think if I was still really in the trenches working all this stuff out, I think I would find it really hard to talk about it and answer questions and stuff. So I wanted to be able to have a little bit of distance from the character so I could like comment on and critique things that she was doing. It would have been way too messy. I think still it was a weird experience though, writing it like kind of the most physically well I've ever been, writing about the diagnosis process. Like it I'm sure you feel like this reading it, Mom, really pissed me off. All the stuff with the doctor. Yeah. That's oh yeah, no, the question about how much of it is real, like kind of all of the doctor's conversations are real. But that's it. I don't feel bad about like putting that to print because their fault. They said it.
It makes me think what you were saying. I've never heard that expression, but like wounded, like writing from not from the wound, but from the scar.
Yeah.
But there was a thing because I do like write like self-writing memoir stuff a lot. And there was an essay online, maybe on LitHub or something, that was talking about how you write about vulnerability. And it was like you can either write vulnerability as a wound or as a window, which I thought was like a really it's like kind of similar to what you're saying, that you're not kind of exposing yourself, but it's kind of choosing what parts that you let someone kind of see into.
Yeah, it's I used to teach a lot of like creative nonfiction workshops for the mental health charities that I worked for, and it was quite a lot more about journaling and personal writing, and we had a lot of conversations about being aware of what you want to share with an audience and thinking about whether or not it's going to hurt you or whether it's going to be positive for you.
Yeah.
And we used to say a lot. So it's funny, I was doing these workshops. I don't really publish creative nonfiction, so I'm way too much of a wimp. So I'm here like chit chatting about everything I think while not publishing anything. But we used to talk a lot about the fact like the vulnerability is writing it, and the self in it is your unique perspective. You don't have to like mine your trauma, and say the worst thing that ever happened to you. Yeah, you're still.
Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, I think unless we have like a burning other question, we can probably leave it there. Please join me in thanking Madeline for such a lovely event. So I believe there's a book signing in the next sprint. So you can get your book signed, you can buy your books. Very cute, very exciting. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay. No, I know.
Yeah. I was just like, yeah, I know, it's funny.
Right. Like I said. Almost would divine. Yeah. And it's all funny and yeah, comes off. You have not.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how she could find it.
Yeah, I'm from Cardiff, but I told you about.
Yeah.
And I also sometimes use the Scottish accent.
Oh, do you ever pick it up?
Yeah.
Well, that's something.
Yeah,
Like I
random.
say, the Hindi a lot.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you don't think that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm trying to brush that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, these are.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, give me whatever.
I could see you making that. Oh, yeah, no, you've got. Yes, I got it.
No, I saw
I
it.
got
Yeah.
Did you know what?
Yeah. Okay, she said she would just want my email. Send me one. And I was like, great. My hour. I'm excited. It's gonna be so good.
All of the time. Yeah. So we need, and we all need that. This is. Well, good luck to you. Maybe I'll see you.
Bye.
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 Like the evening of like. I hope it is.
Laura asked anything on mine, or I would have keep it. Okay. I used to keep it. Just queue up with it. Yeah, just, you want to write it with and then, to get it signed, we can do into the. That was a very. Oh, thank you.
It's hard to do that part as well.
Yeah, fun bee, but she was great.
Great.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah.
So hard.
It can be. Yeah, I think it is like nice to have chocolate and just make it friendly rather than scared.
Yeah.
Which is not my vibe at all. I can probably tell. Yeah, not very good with that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, do it. It's good. Okay.
Maybe we can send it to them, like,
I truly don't know.
however you want.
It's like when you want to buy, right? And you're like, oh my god. But I really have.
Alison's on my side. Like, when we come down to Rosie Allen House, row house was a bad.
Fucking hell, do that.
Already was hard. Yeah. This is like a fan biography. It's so good. It just makes you feel friends. You know what I mean? That's like icky about it. But you know, I find that it's
But they're like restricted views. That they are.
And so that's like, for a second, I considered it, there's like, it would be direct.
Sure, yeah. But it's price gouging. Like it's.
Also, because it's like £600 for this special area.
Yeah.
You get like.
You don't want to prep names. You just want to go.
I am sure
But like there will be a significant cost up in scale. I am recent.
if there is.
Yeah. You want it. Yeah. Okay, I will see you next week. I'm back from Italy.
You are a fool.
I am. Yeah, I really am.